You called them here, the director accused as 100 engines fell silent outside. Owen stared through the glass. I don't know any of them. Then the scarred biker placed the service tag with its copper eyelet on the table and said, "Can you access the workshop log? Cut the power now." Dr. Lenora Voss's command struck the workshop at the same instant a steel socket tray slipped from Owen Halbrook's hand and crashed across the epoxy floor, sending 12 chrome pieces spinning beneath the motorcycle. At 7:43 p.m., Owen was flat on his back beneath the black cruiser, one shoulder pressed against the cold floor, two fingers steadying an insulated test probe that had slipped and flashed blue against the frame. The air smelled of hot copper, floor disinfectant, old gasoline, and the bitter coffee he had forgotten beside the tool cabinet 3 hours earlier. Nobody moved. Owen eased his hand away from the wire and looked past the front wheel toward Lenora's polished shoes, which stopped exactly at the edge of the oil stain, as if the dark crescent were a boundary she refused to cross. Behind her, Silas Gravel Rourke stood beside the workbench in a weathered leather jacket, his gray beard damp with mist, his left cheek crossed by a pale scar, and his right wrist held close to his chest. He looked built to lift the motorcycle alone. He could not. "That vehicle leaves the property in 5 minutes, Lenora said, glancing at the digital wall clock and then at Owen's after-hours workshop badge. Owen's Level 2 badge permitted independent diagnostics until closing, although outside vehicles still required a documented community service classification. The Joint Accreditation and Grant Compliance Team arrives at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. The donor photographs begin at 8:20, and I will not have an oil-soaked stranger standing in the middle of a certified training facility." Owen slid out from beneath the bike, his coveralls dragging through the sharp scent of degreaser, and rose with a 3/8-inch wrench still clenched in his hand. Silas lowered his eyes. "Kid, I can roll it out." He reached for the handlebars, but when he tried to support the motorcycle's weight at walking speed, his old wrist injury buckled even though his hand could still close around the throttle. The motorcycle leaned 6 inches. Owen caught it. Lenora did not step forward. "The public gate locks at 8, she said. "Staff badges can still release the service exit, but he should be gone before then." Outside the glass service doors, the parking lot was almost empty, the last orange strip of daylight already fading beyond the chain-link fence. The nearest repair shop was 19 miles east. The temperature had fallen to 41 degrees Fahrenheit, and the county road between the school and town had no shoulder for nearly 7 miles. Owen had heard the engine fail twice before Silas pushed the bike onto campus. Each time, the ignition cut without warning and returned only after the casing cooled. Sending him out now would not mean sending him home. It would mean sending him into the dark. "I need 15 minutes, Owen said. Lenora looked at the oil mark, the scar biker, and the inspection checklist clipped beneath her arm. "You have 0. She reached past the doorframe and shut off the bench circuit, leaving the diagnostic lamp dead above the exposed engine. Silas quietly placed 2 folded $20 bills beside Owen's cold coffee. Owen pushed them back without looking at the amount. Then he watched Lenora walk toward the administration wing, her heels counting 12 hard steps before the fire door closed behind her. The wall clock changed to 7:48. Owen waited 3 seconds. He turned the power back on. The diagnostic lamp flared back to life above the exposed engine, harsh and white, turning every scratch on the old black cruiser into a bright line against the immaculate workshop. Owen clipped the meter to the ignition pickup leads, watched a stable 218-ohm reading turn intermittent during cranking, then asked Silas to press the starter once and only once. The engine coughed, the overhead fan hummed, and a faint metallic click disappeared beneath the sterile buzz of fluorescent tubes. Again, Silas pressed the switch. Owen leaned closer until he could smell burned insulation beneath the sharper odors of lemon disinfectant and warm oil, then traced the failure past the battery and coil to the ignition pickup housing. At 7:56 p.m., the school's automated closing announcement sounded through the ceiling speakers, reminding all remaining occupants that the exterior doors would switch to badge-only access in 4 minutes. Nothing about the workshop felt polite. Stainless steel cabinets reflected Silas's broad shape in broken fragments, his worn leather jacket and grease-darkened boots looking almost unreal beside laminated safety posters, color-coded tool drawers, and a display engine polished so perfectly it had probably never been started. Owen removed 3 screws, set them in a magnetic tray, and lifted the cover. The ignition pickup plate looked clean. Too clean. He wiped it with a white cloth, warmed the assembly with a heat gun for 11 seconds, and saw a hairline split open near the lower mounting point. Silas bent forward. That little crack stopped the whole bike. Only after it gets hot, Owen said. Cold metal closes it. Heat opens it. The answer seemed to settle something in Silas. He stopped looking at Owen like a student. He started watching him like a mechanic. Owen checked the parts cabinet, but the correct plate was not in stock. Every replacement drawer had been reorganized for the inspection, each been labeled, counted, and sealed with a blue inventory strip. There were 48 new sockets, 6 digital torque wrenches, and not one compatible pickup plate or approved ground strap. He opened the after-hours parts locker near the welding bay and found a current-rated copper terminal strap priced at $6.75. His campus debit balance held $8.10, the money he had planned to use for dinner. Owen bought the terminal strap. The locker released the sealed packet with a cheerful confirmation tone, while his stomach tightened at the smell of reheated soup drifting from a staff lounge. Silas noticed. Let me pay for that. You can pay me by holding the lights steady. Owen trimmed the terminal strap to size, insulated its edges, checked continuity twice, and began shaping a temporary ground connection that would survive the ride into town without pretending to be a permanent repair. At 8:07, the badge reader chirped and the side door opened, admitting Curtis Bellamy with his canvas coat over one arm. He stopped when he saw the live bench, the dismantled motorcycle, and Silas seated beneath a framed photograph of smiling donors. Tell me Lenora didn't see this. Owen did not look up. Curtis lowered his voice. She's already printed a suspension notice. Silas started to rise, but Owen shook his head. Curtis stood between the spotless inspection bay and the stained service mat, his face showing the exact distance between what he believed and what he was willing to defend. You have 10 minutes, he said at last. Then he switched the door to badge-only entry while leaving the emergency egress mechanism untouched. At 8:16 p.m., Owen secured the final terminal strap, checked the temporary ground connection for movement, and wiped the pickup plate with a square of clean cloth. Curtis dimmed the empty inspection bays but left the full task lighting active over Owen's work area, isolating the motorcycle in a bright island of chrome cabinets and white tile. Silas stood beside a display case filled with polished student trophies, his scarred reflection caught between gold lettering and spotless glass, while the real work left black crescents beneath Owen's fingernails. Try it. Silas settled onto the seat, turned the key, and pressed the starter. The engine rolled once, twice, then caught with a deep, even pulse that filled the workshop without shaking it. Owen watched the diagnostic display for 20 seconds. The ignition pulse remained stable. The repaired ignition stayed steady as the engine warmed, the temporary ground strap maintaining continuity even when the hairline fracture expanded. Silas eased off the throttle. The motor idled cleanly beneath banners promising precision, professionalism, and service, 3 words printed large enough to cover half the eastern wall. For the first time that night, the workshop sounded like the place those words described. Owen shut the engine down and began the safety check. Lights, brake pressure, cable travel, fuel line, temporary repair marking. He wrote each result on a heavy service tag reinforced with a copper eyelet and listed the fault as a heat-expanded ignition pickup ground fracture. Under labor, he wrote 0. Under total, he wrote no charge. Silas set 2 folded 20s beside the cold coffee again. Owen pushed them back. Keep it for a permanent plate. You used your dinner money. I used $6.75. That was still your dinner. Owen attached the tag to the fractured pickup plate and slid both into a clear zippered parts bag from the diagnostic cabinet. Behind them, Curtis glanced toward the locked door, then at the suspension form glowing on the office printer across the hall. The The machine had produced one page in perfect black type. Owen's repair had produced a running motorcycle. The school seemed more comfortable trusting the paper. At 8:22, Lenora's heels returned along the corridor. Curtis moved away from the lock before she reached the door, but not quickly enough to hide what he had done. Lenora entered carrying the printed notice and a blue folder marked Saturday Review. She looked first at the clean floor, then at the motorcycle, then at the handwritten tag hanging from Owen's fingers. You ignored a direct instruction. The bike can leave safely now, Owen said. That was not the instruction. Silas stepped forward, but Owen lifted one hand without turning. He did not want the man defending him. Not yet. Lenora placed the suspension notice on the stainless workbench, its white paper unnaturally bright beside the grease-darkened wrench Owen had used. The decision removed Owen from the shop pending review and suspended his remaining practical hours. Without those hours, he could miss his completion date by an entire term. Curtis read the second line twice. His jaw tightened. He said nothing. Lenora offered Owen a pen. Signed that you received it. Owen wiped his thumb on a rag, leaving one black streak across the cloth, and signed. Silas reached into his jacket again, but this time he did not remove money. He pointed toward the clear parts bag. Can I keep the broken plate and the tag? Lenora gave a thin smile. Take every piece of it. Owen handed the parts bag over. Silas studied the time entries, the resistance readings, the heat cycle result, and the neat line that said, no charge. Then he folded the two bills back into his wallet. Outside, the mist had thickened against the glass doors, turning the parking lot lights into pale circles. Silas wheeled the repaired motorcycle toward the exit with one hand and paused beside Owen. You always document your work like this? Every repair. Silas nodded once. Good. Curtis released the service gate with his staff badge, and 30 seconds later the engine started in the cold without hesitation. Owen listened until the sound faded down the county road. Then Lenora switched off his work lamp. At 9:03 p.m., Owen sat at the narrow kitchen table in his mother's apartment, scrubbing his hands with dish soap that smelled like artificial lime. Black oil remained beneath 3 fingernails, a thin crescent under each one, while the suspension notice lay perfectly white beside a chipped ceramic plate holding 2 slices of cold toast. His mother worked the overnight shift at a packaging plant and would not return until dawn. Owen folded the paper once, then unfolded it, unable to decide which looked worse, hiding it or leaving it visible. The apartment heater clicked every 40 seconds but produced little warmth. Across town, the school's workshop would now be dark, its polished floors empty, its inspection banners hanging straight beneath controlled heat. Here, the window leaked cold air around the frame, the refrigerator hummed unevenly, and Owen's cold toast tasted faintly of the lime soap he had used to scrub his hands. He opened his student portal. The notice was already there. Practical access suspended. Review required at 7:30 a.m. He had 28 shop hours left before completion. Missing Saturday's assessment could push those hours into the next term, and the next term required a fee he did not have. Owen closed the laptop. He did not regret fixing the motorcycle. He regretted how expensive doing the right thing could become. 3 miles from the school, Silas parked outside a roadside diner where the red neon sign had lost 2 letters and the asphalt was stained with years of oil. The motorcycle idled steadily in the cold, its repaired ignition holding through every heat cycle Owen had predicted. Inside, the diner smelled of bacon grease, scorched coffee, and cinnamon pie. Silas chose the last booth, removed his gloves, and set the clear parts bag beneath the yellow hanging lamp. The fractured ignition pickup plate looked insignificant against the scratched tabletop. The service tag with its copper-eyelet did not. He read Owen's handwriting once. Then again. Time received. 7:41 p.m. Ventilation active. 7:46. Electrical isolation confirmed. 7:49. Temporary ground strap installed. 8:14. No charge. Beneath Owen's signature was a 6-digit workshop code whose prefix Silas recognized from the fund's community use reporting system. He turned the tag toward the light. That code belonged to the community service protocol his fund had required when it approved the school's equipment grant 3 years earlier. The protocol existed for exactly this kind of work. Supervised or documented assistance to stranded motorists, provided safety procedures were followed. Silas took an old phone from his jacket and called a number from memory. "Merritt," a voice answered. "You still keep the grant agreements?" Silas asked. "Every page. Find a vocational school file. Section 7, Eligible Community Use and Compliance Cure Procedures." A pause followed. Silverware clinked behind Silas, and a waitress refilled his cup without asking. "Found it," Merritt said. "Why?" Silas looked at the fractured pickup plate, the careful resistance and heat cycle notes, and the two words written where a price should have been. A student followed the agreement. The school punished him for how it looked. By 9:28, Silas had made 6 calls. By 9:41, those 6 people had called others. He gave the same instruction each time. No signs, no shouting, no blocking entrances, no engine noise once parked. "Bring your copy of the funding record," he said, "and come only if you can stand quietly." At 10:06, more than 100 riders had answered. Silas asked the road captain to admit only the first 100 motorcycles to the designated visitor lot and direct everyone else to remain at the north staging point. Silas placed the service tag with its copper eyelet back inside the parts bag and sealed it. Then he sent one final message. "Meet at the north access road at 7:15 a.m. No signs, no shouting, and no blocked lanes. We're going there to be counted." At 7:18 the next morning, Owen stepped through the school's glass entrance carrying the same canvas tool bag he had brought every Saturday for 2 years. The lobby smelled of fresh wax, cinnamon pastries, and the sharp floral spray Lenora used before donor visits. While beyond the interior windows, the workshop looked untouched. Every chrome surface aligned beneath white lights, and every safety cone placed exactly 12 feet apart. Owen's boots squeaked against the polished floor. No one greeted him. A temporary sign beside the reception desk directed inspectors toward the presentation hall, and beneath it another sheet directed Owen to conference room B for disciplinary review at 7:30. Curtis waited outside the room with 2 paper cups of coffee. He offered one, then lowered it when he saw Owen's expression. "I pulled the workshop log," Curtis said. "Lenora asked you to?" "No." That single word carried more weight than an apology. Inside conference room B, Lenora had arranged 4 chairs around a narrow table, with Owen's suspension notice centered beside a silver pen and the blank wall directly behind her. Her blue folder sat closed at her right hand. "This meeting concerns unauthorized use, disregard of instruction, and reputational risk," she said. Owen looked through the narrow window toward the spotless corridor. The bike left safely. That is not the standard under review. At 7:37, a low vibration moved through the glass. It was faint at first, no louder than the building's heating system, but it deepened until the silver pen trembled against the tabletop. Curtis turned toward the window. Lenora stopped speaking. A line of motorcycles appeared beyond the front gate, headlights cutting through the pale morning mist one after another, each rider slowing before entering the campus access road. 10 bikes became 23. 23 became 48. They did not race, crowd, or rev their engines. They entered in measured intervals, parked along the outer edge of the lot, and shut down one by one. The silence arrived in waves. By 7:46, 72 motorcycles stood in rows across the asphalt, their dark frames and weathered saddlebags facing a school decorated with white banners, glass doors, and stainless donor plaques. By 7:51, the count reached 100. Every rider removed a helmet and remained beside a motorcycle. The riders were mostly middle-aged or older, many scarred or gray-bearded, their worn leather looking almost black beneath the clean blue morning. No one approached the doors. They simply waited. Students gathering for the inspection pressed close to the second-floor windows. A receptionist switched the front entrance to controlled access while keeping the emergency exits clear. Lenora looked at Owen. "You called them here." "I don't know any of them." 100 people do not arrive by accident. Owen stared through the glass, searching the rows until he recognized the repaired cruiser near the rear. Silas sat motionless in the saddle, his right wrist wrapped beneath his glove. He waited until every engine had stopped before stepping off. Then he removed a thin brown envelope from his jacket and held up the clear parts bag containing the fractured pickup plate and service tag with its copper eyelet. At 7:56, he walked alone toward the entrance. The riders behind him did not follow. Lenora ordered the receptionist to keep the doors locked, but Curtis crossed the lobby and opened them before she could stop him. Cold air entered first, carrying the smells of damp leather, exhaust, and wet pavement into the waxed building. Silas wiped his boots carefully on the white entry mat. "Morning," he said. Lenora remained beside the conference table. "This is school property. Your group cannot disrupt today's review." Silas glanced through the windows at the silent rows outside. Every motorcycle is in a marked visitor space or along the public access road. Every fire lane is open, and not one engine is running. He set the clear parts bag on the table. "I'm here alone." Lenora's eyes moved to the tag. "Then state your business." Silas placed the envelope beside Owen's suspension notice, aligning its edge with the page as neatly as she had. "I am here on behalf of the Vocational Trades Fund listed on the plaque in your lobby." For the first time that morning, Lenora looked toward the donor wall. Silas pulled out a chair, but did not sit. "Before your inspectors arrive," he said, "I would like you to explain why a student was punished for following the service agreement your school signed." Lenora's hand rested on the blue folder, but she did not open it. Through the conference room glass, the first members of the inspection team entered the lobby in dark coats, carrying tablets and polished metal cases, while 100 riders remained outside beneath the pale morning, motionless beside rain-speckled motorcycles. The school's white banners hung above them like promises nobody had expected to test. "The fund does not direct student discipline," Lenora said. Silas removed a 4-page agreement from a brown envelope and placed it beside the suspension notice. The paper was worn at the folds, unlike the untouched forms arranged across her table, and the bottom page carried the school's embossed seal. "No," he said, "but it does define what the equipment was purchased to support." Owen stared at the first page. The fund's name matched the brass plaque mounted in the lobby, the one students passed every morning without reading. Silas's legal name appeared beneath the heading for program administration. Curtis leaned forward. "You managed the grant?" "For 11 years. Silas turned the agreement to Section 7 and tapped a paragraph marked with a narrow yellow line. The clause defined documented community assistance as an eligible use of grant-funded facilities when electrical isolation, ventilation, material tracking, and safety records were completed. Owen recognized the 6-digit protocol printed beneath it. It was the same code he had written on the service tag with its copper eyelet. Lenora read the paragraph without changing expression. This was not an authorized service event. "Then let's examine what happened instead of what it looked like." Silas placed the clear parts bag at the center of the table. Inside, the fractured plate sat against Owen's careful notes, a blackened piece of metal no larger than 2 fingers confronting a room full of spotless paperwork. At 8:03, the lead inspector paused outside the conference room. Lenora saw him through the glass and lowered her voice. "This conversation should be private." Silas looked toward the writers. "It is private. Many of them have funded, hired from, or trained through programs governed by that agreement, and the rest came as documented supporters of the same trades network. They do not need to enter." He faced Curtis. "Can you access the workshop log?" Curtis's eyes moved to Lenora. She said nothing. He opened the school tablet, entered his credentials, and projected the previous night's records onto the wall. A clean blue screen appeared above the chairs, bright enough to wash color from every face. Login: Owen Halbrook, 7:42 p.m. Ventilation active, 7:46. Electrical isolation recorded, 7:49. Diagnostic meter checked out, 7:50. Material purchase, personal student account, $6.75. Curtis scrolled. He completed the safety checklist. After being told to stop, Lenora said. "Before the repair began," Curtis replied. The room went still. It was the first time he had corrected her. Silas asked for the time-synchronized corridor and workshop footage. Curtis opened the recording from 7:38 to 8:25. The footage showed Silas pushing the disabled motorcycle through the mist, Owen inspecting the leaking line, Lenora pointing toward the bench disconnect, and Owen cutting the power before catching the machine when Silas's wrist gave way. There was no threat, no request for special treatment, and no payment accepted. The camera also showed Owen placing absorbent pads beneath the engine and cleaning the floor before reopening the ignition housing. The workshop on-screen looked as polished as it did that morning. Only the work was real. Lenora folded her hands. The student still created reputational risk hours before an inspection. Silas did not answer immediately. He removed a current contributor and employer roster, listing 74 local shops, tradespeople, and past recipients connected to the fund. What damages a vocational school's reputation more, he asked. An oil stain cleaned in 12 minutes, or punishing a student for practicing the values printed on your wall. Outside, one rider adjusted a glove. 99 others remained still. At 8:09, the lead inspector opened the conference room door and remained at the threshold. I believe, he said, looking at the projected workshop log, this matter now concerns the review. The lead inspector entered carrying a silver case and set it beside the spotless hardware on the conference table. Two colleagues followed, their dark coats still beaded with mist, while behind the glass wall, 100 weathered motorcycles stood in precise rows beneath the school's white promotional banners. The contrast was almost too clean to be accidental. Lenora rose. This is an internal disciplinary matter. The inspector set his case beside the fractured ignition pickup plate. It became part of our review when the matter involved grant compliance, workshop access, and student competency records. Silas remained standing. He did not raise his voice, glance toward the parking lot, or ask the riders to move closer. Their distance was the pressure. Curtis projected the remaining workshop data onto the wall. Tool checkout, ventilation duration, electrical isolation, absorbent pad disposal, and a stable 219-ohm pickup reading through the final heat cycle. Every entry appeared in blue against a white screen, orderly and exact, while Owen's hands still carried traces of black grease beneath the nails. The inspector asked Owen to explain the repair. Owen described the heat-expanded ground fracture, the temporary terminal strap, and the reason he had limited the solution to a safe ride into town. He did not mention Lenora's behavior. He did not defend himself with emotion. He described the machine. One inspector examined the fracture plate through a small magnifier. Another compared the service tag to the electronic log. This diagnosis is advanced for an entry-level practical assessment, she said. He is 28 practical hours from completion, Curtis replied. This is the level he has been working at all term. Lenora opened her blue folder. Those hours are suspended because he continued after a direct instruction. Silas removed one final document from the brown envelope. It contained 2 signature blocks and no dramatic language. He placed it beside her folder. Then the grant's cure procedure leaves the school with 2 documented options. Outside, a breeze moved through the rows of riders, lifting jacket collars and carrying the faint smell of damp leather through the open lobby doors. No engine started. No one approached. Silas pointed to the first block. Option 1. Classify the repair under Section 7. Restore Owen's workshop access and submit the incident for transparent review with a full safety record attached. His finger moved to the second. Option 2. Maintain the suspension, acknowledge a potential misclassification under the grant, and accept an immediate freeze on the remaining funds while a 10-business-day cure review begins. Lenora's expression tightened. The unspent amount was printed beneath the second block, $184,600. That money had been reserved for diagnostic equipment, welding ventilation upgrades, and 12 student scholarships scheduled for announcement at 8:20. Through the glass, a photographer was already arranging students beneath a banner that read skills serve the community. The words faced the parking lot. Silas slid the form toward Lenora, then stepped back. No one outside is asking you for a favor, he said. They are here because their names, shops, and contributions are attached to the agreement you signed. Lenora looked toward Owen. You understand this gathering could be interpreted as intimidation. Owen answered before Silas could. I didn't ask them to come. And they have broken no rule, the lead inspector added. Every motorcycle is in a marked visitor space or on the public access road. Every fire lane is clear, and no rider has entered a restricted instructional area. Curtis placed Owen's suspension notice beside the two-option form. One document was bright, new, and based on appearance. The other was worn at the folds and backed by records. Lenora picked up the silver pen. For 3 seconds, she held it above the first signature block. Then she stopped. Silas did not move. Neither did the 100 riders outside. The wall clock changed to 8:18, leaving 2 minutes before the scholarship announcement. Lenora finally looked at the inspector. And if I request more time? The inspector closed the silver case. Then the scholarship announcement pauses. The remaining funds are placed on administrative hold, and the compliance question enters today's preliminary review record. The polished room seemed suddenly too small. Silas turned the service tag by its copper eyelet until the handwritten words faced Lenora. No charge. The student made his choice last night, he said. This morning, the school makes its own. Before Lenora could lower the pen, the lead inspector placed one hand over the two-option form. I want to see the repair demonstrated before either document is signed, he said. Lenora left the pen beside the unsigned forms. The announcement begins in 2 minutes, she said. Not yet, the inspector said. He lifted the clear parts bag from the table and studied the fractured pickup plate beneath the cold white ceiling lights. We came to evaluate training quality, not a ceremony. At 8:23, the inspection team crossed the lobby toward the workshop, followed by Lenora, Curtis, Owen, and Silas. Students waiting beneath the banner stepped aside, their pressed uniforms and polished safety shoes forming a clean corridor around Silas's rain-dark leather jacket. Outside the glass walls, 100 riders remained beside their motorcycles, black silhouettes against a bright parking lot striped with fresh white paint. Inside, the workshop smelled of wax, new rubber mats, cinnamon pastries, and the faint trace of degreaser left from the night before. A display engine stood beneath a spotlight, while a separate operational training engine waited at the adjacent assessment bench with its fuel valve closed and battery disconnected. Owen's workbench held one stained rag. The inspector placed the fractured plate on the stainless surface. Show us how you found it. Owen collected a meter, heat gun, insulated leads, and magnifier. His hands moved more steadily around tools than they had around the conference table. He explained how the ignition reading remained stable while cold, how the circuit collapsed after the metal expanded, and why replacing random components would have hidden the real failure without solving it. He warmed the fractured pickup plate until the infrared thermometer reached the temperature recorded in his notes. The hairline split opened again. One inspector leaned closer. Another checked Owen's measurements against the handwritten service tag. Lenora stood beneath the wall slogan skills, "Serve the community," holding Owen's still active suspension notice against her blue folder. The paper looked smaller there. Why did you install a temporary ground strap instead of claiming a complete repair? The lead inspector asked. Because I didn't have the correct plate, Owen said. A temporary repair should get someone safely to a proper replacement. It shouldn't pretend to be permanent. Curtis looked down at the floor. Then he stepped forward. He also refused to use sealed grant inventory without authorization. The $6.75 terminal strap came from his personal account. Lenora turned toward him. Curtis did not step back. And I was present for the final test, he continued. The repair met the safety threshold. I should have said that last night. Silence moved across the workshop, different from the silence outside. This one belonged to a man, finally choosing a side. At 8:37, the lead inspector sealed the clear parts bag and announced that Owen's practical assessment would continue immediately. The prepared donor photographs were postponed. The inspection team wanted to observe the student working, not standing beneath a banner. Silas opened the brown envelope again, but this time he removed no contract. He placed a single-page invitation to a paid apprenticeship interview and skills assessment on Owen's bench. It reserved Owen an interview with 3 participating repair businesses and guaranteed equal consideration based on the documented skills assessment. "This is not a reward for fixing my bike," Silas said. "It is an opportunity based on the work documented here." Owen read the first line, then looked through the windows at the riders. "What about the school?" "The fund will support a community service bay," Silas said, "if students can use it without being punished for making the room look used." Lenora's face tightened, but the inspector was already writing the recommendation into his tablet. Owen placed the offer back on the bench. "Only if other qualified students can apply too." Silas studied him for a moment. Then he smiled. "That condition is acceptable." At 8:44, the lead inspector handed Owen a clean pair of safety glasses and pointed toward the operational training engine at the assessment bench. "Make it run." Owen verified the lockout tag, reconnected the battery under the inspector's supervision, opened the fuel valve, and checked the ignition circuit. Through the open service doors, 100 riders heard the training engine turn over. At 8:52 a.m., Lenora returned to the conference table with the inspection team, Owen, Curtis, and Silas, while 100 riders remained silent beyond the glass. The workshop log, synchronized footage, fractured pickup plate, heat cycle demonstration, and grant agreement now supported the same conclusion. Silas turned the service tag until no charge faced Lenora. "The student made his choice last night," he said. "This morning, the school makes its own." Lenora looked through the glass at the 100 riders, then at Owen's suspension notice, the grant agreement, and the service tag marked no charge. She signed the first block and countersigned the rescission form, withdrawing his suspension. The remaining grant funds stayed active. Owen's workshop access was restored, and the repair was formally classified as documented community assistance. No rider moved until the lead inspector placed both signed documents into the official review file. At 8:56, Silas raised one hand toward the parking lot. 100 riders started their motorcycles in orderly rows and departed without blocking a single lane. 8 weeks later, the old donor display bay no longer held a polished engine that had never run, a white carpet no mechanic could step on, or a banner arranged for photographs. The carpet was gone. The walls had been fitted with steel shelving, and a permanent sign above the open service door read Community Repair in 001. Beneath it, in a small glass case, rested the fractured ignition pickup plate and Owen's service tag with its copper eyelet, the handwritten words "No charge" still visible beside the time, resistance readings, heat cycle result, and his signature. The workshop had changed. So had Owen. He now entered through the same glass doors without lowering his eyes, wore his after-hours badge without fearing who might question it, and served every Saturday as student lead under Curtis's supervision while qualified students helped stranded adults through documented safety procedures. Curtis ran the program beside him, but he no longer spoke for Owen when inspectors, visitors, or administrators asked technical questions. He let the young mechanic answer. At 9:12 on the community bay's first Saturday, Silas returned alone on the repaired cruiser, carrying a narrow wooden box beneath one arm. There were no riders behind him, no line of headlights, and no silent wall of leather in the parking lot. The 100 had already delivered their message by arriving, remaining within the rules, and refusing to give Lenora anything she could call disorder. Their stillness had exposed the difference between authority and control. Silas placed the wooden box on Owen's bench and opened it. Inside was an old brass inspection gauge worn smooth along the edges, engraved with the name of the first community garage the riders had funded 27 years earlier. "Every shop needs something that reminds people why the doors are open," Silas said. Owen lifted the gauge carefully. "You're leaving this here? It belongs where someone will use it." Across the workshop, Lenora stood with the returning lead inspector beside the new service bay during its scheduled compliance follow-up. Following a 6-week board review, Lenora remained in her post under a formal corrective action plan, and any workshop access suspension now required approval from both the program chair and the compliance officer. The policy was mounted on the wall in a plain black frame. It was not an apology. It was harder to remove than one. The inspector asked Lenora to identify the program's first documented case. She looked toward the glass box, then toward Owen. "The motorcycle repair from October 17th, she said. "Completed safely under the community service clause." Silas said nothing. He did not need to. The records, the signed agreement, the restored access, the riders who had filled the lot without breaking a single rule, and the permanent policy on the wall had already closed every escape. Lenora read the case number aloud, then signed the follow-up record beneath the same community use clause she had once tried to dismiss. At 10:04, the first vehicle entered the new bay, an aging pickup driven by a retired warehouse worker whose alternator warning light had come on 6 miles outside town. Owen assigned the diagnostic steps to 2 students, checked their isolation procedure, and watched them begin. When he turned back, Silas had mounted the brass gauge on the shadow board above Owen's bench, within easy reach beside the diagnostic meters. "You really wanted to stay here?" Owen asked. Silas pulled on his gloves. "I just did." Outside, engines began to approach from the county road. Not 100 this time. Only 6 riders, each with a donated tool case secured to a rear rack or saddlebag. They parked, shut down, and entered quietly. Owen opened the service door wider. The room no longer looked perfect. It looked useful. If you believe in the true brotherhood and kindness of bikers, please hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel for more stories. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.